Welcome to the 49th episode of the GameFor Podcast. In this episode, still recording from home, we'll talk about the good and the bad of big tabletop gaming companies. I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
And this is the GameFor Podcast. GameFor is a platform to help connect tabletop gamers and to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. Matt and I are part of a software development and design company called MilkCan, and because most of us folks at MilkCan love tabletop games, we developed the GameFor app and launched it in early 2018. We launched this companion podcast in June of 2019 to help tabletop gamers get more enjoyment out of their hobby. Due to the COVID-19 global pandemic, we hibernated the GameFor app in July of 2020 and plan to bring back a retooled version of the app for Android, iOS, and web when gaming in person is safer. Until then, we'll keep bringing you this podcast to help you get more out of your tabletop gaming. We're coming up on the 2-year mark for the podcast. I mean, it's April, but yeah, June we'll be
coming pretty close. Yeah.
I mean, doing it every 2 weeks, and we're at 49, so 52 would be 2 years doing it every 2 weeks, right? Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there.
The math checks. Yep.
Yeah. I'm super good at math. Lord knows. Woo. So, what kind of stuff have you been doing lately? Yeah, I know you were on vacation. You went down south.
Yeah, we went down to the Gulf Shores of Alabama, which is right next to Florida as well, and kind of hung out on the beach. But while we were able to social distance, it wasn't like I think like Miami. I think I saw the stuff that like it was super crowded.
The spring break stuff.
Yeah, this was like super sparse. People. There was people there, but we were definitely not on top of one another. So that was nice, and then we could mask up and stay safe.
You guys weren't even really in a hotel. You guys got a Airbnb or something, didn't you?
Yeah. It was like a condo someone rented out for it. So yeah, there was like nobody there type thing.
Yeah.
It was nice. So I was all set. Had my hobby kit. We were concerned about whether we had room for it, and then some last minute snafus with packing sent me to the store early Saturday morning before we left. And by the time I got back, I was kind of feeling rushed to get us going on the road and got the stuff taken care of and forgot my hobby kit till we were, I think, about 30 or 45 minutes away. And we decided that it wasn't worth me turning around and going back for.
Right. Yeah. That's a bummer.
Yeah. So, but I did bring my Blood Bowl rules. So I did get to, at least read up on some of that stuff. But no, I didn't get to do too much until we got back, but I did spend the last 2 nights. I finally cracked open the Star Wars Legion starter box. It's the original one, not the Clone Wars version.
Yeah, so that's like the like troopers versus the rebels versus stormtroopers and stuff. It's like from the original movies 4, 5, and 6, known as the Galactic Civil War, is what I've been told.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so I did get everything there assembled, which was super nice. I started doing some Blood Bowl stuff for the other team on like that night I got back, and got really frustrated.
Yeah,
they were some of the pieces were becoming more frustrating than I was ready to deal with. So yeah, one with these, which were, I mean, there was some stuff that were a little fiddly, but I mean, the actual people and stuff was super fast and easy to do. I was kind of shocked.
Yeah, that's cool. So, yeah, those Star Wars Legion like miniatures in the original core starter box, they're not the best sculpts in the world. They're not real dynamic. They got better as they went along, but man, they were fast to build. They were really, really easy and quick to build.
Yeah. I think the speeder bike was the only thing that was a little fiddly.
Right.
And even that wasn't too bad.
Yeah, but like the stormtroopers and the rebels and all that kind of stuff. Like I haven't built any of the rebel stuff yet. I've only been working on Empire, and so I've got 800 points of Empire. Well, they did have a point change recently, so I should check to see if I'm still 800 points or not. But due to the original points, I had 800 points of Empire painted. So and I've got terrain, got a bunch of terrain for that game as well. That is not. Well, it's primed and base coated, and I'm going to be painting it soon. So, but it's a bunch of 3D printed, cool like Tatooine type buildings, which I can use for other stuff as well, which is neat. So yeah, that's cool. I'm glad to hear you get into that because I think eventually we'll be able to actually play it. And I know that one of our local shops is getting big into it too. So
Yeah, so yeah, that's my goal. I think we'll have so many games to play. It'll be
Oh yeah,
crazy.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna have so much Warcry stuff ready to go, and like even I mean, since this pandemic, I've done two more kill teams and
hmm Yeah, I've got
war
like one and
bands.
a half.
Yeah, I've done two more completed kill teams for kill team, and I've done one, two, three, four, five, maybe five war bands for Warcry, like that are all
Wow.
finished because
Yeah.
it's it's what I've been doing on Twitch. You know what I mean? So
Right. So yeah, you and I could probably play like not reuse the same thing more than once, and probably play like 20 something games easily without.
yeah.
And that's just us. I know like everybody else is in the same boat. Like,
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it's interesting the way the pandemic has treated different types of players differently. You know, board
mhm.
gamers are in a rough spot because if you're not able to play with your family, like it's I guess you could
Yeah.
again reconfigure the way the components fit in the box again. You could go through on your board games and figure out which ones you want to get rid of and stuff like that. But there's not a lot of hobby actual time that you spend on it.
Yeah,
Whereas
some of the ones with the minis now you can paint up and something like
true,
that if
yeah,
you wanted to,
absolutely,
but
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, there's not a lot to do. Mine are kind of collecting dust right now. I know I bought a number of them right before
Hmm.
everything, so yeah, they're still basically. I don't even know if I have them all punched out, to be honest.
Yeah.
So
But with miniatures, I mean, it's given people who had been playing a decent amount, and because they were playing, they didn't have time to paint because just the time, and also
right.
like, well, if I paint these guys, I can't play with them right now because they'll be partially done. Well, now they've
hmm
had time to crank through and get a lot of stuff finished. So it depends. I mean, I think with the Magic players and stuff like that, they've got sure they can go through their collections and build new decks, but they still can't really play. Although a lot of Magic players have switched over to playing the computer game
Arena.
version,
Yep.
Arena. Yeah, but I've also heard things about that program being a little janky as well. So
hmm
I've not used it, but I've watched it. I've watched it a little bit on Twitch. But yeah, it's been an interesting year. Let's just say that. I'm sure that everyone kind of knows that, but
Yeah. Well, and you got your vaccine shot since the last time we recorded. I think your first one,
yes,
right?
I got
Or
my first one, and my second one is coming up on towards the end of April, like the 20 something if, and so
nice.
yeah, so
Yeah,
that'll
I've
be
got one
good.
week to go for mine.
Yeah,
So.
my wife got both of hers now, but because she works at the university,
Mm.
and the second one did mess with her a bit. She gave her a lot of fatigue, but otherwise she was fine. And she's better now. So,
Good.
but yeah, so that's been good. You been working on anything else or doing any? I mean, being gone, obviously, you didn't do any like RPGs or anything like that,
Yeah,
particularly.
so yeah, so that's that kind of right in the middle of being gone. I mean, we were gone technically only a week, but it
Hmm.
was with planning and packing and everything else. So it kind of took up both weekends. So yeah, that's kind of been my hobby for the last 2 weeks.
When you came
How
back,
about
you needed a
yourself?
vacation from your vacation. Huh?
Right.
What? Exactly.
Yep.
What have I been doing? Well, let's see. So, I finished, and I'm going to use air quotes there. I finished my Mutalith Vortex Beast that I've been working on Twitch. I decided
Mm.
partway through March that it was Monster March because I had been working on one big kind of monster, and then I started painting another monster. So I'm going to try to do that going forward. We're going to get rid of this March Madness thing, and we're just going to make it Monster March, and that's what everyone's going to do. Um,
Or
but
you
yeah,
could you could
so
do Cthulhu, and then
yeah,
it's
well,
March
yeah, there's lots of all
Madness.
kinds of monsters I could do. That's March 2 Madness, maybe then. Yeah.
Oh, I like
Mm,
it. March 2
yeah.
Madness monsters.
Right.
Oh, yep.
Yeah. But and when I say finished in air quotes, it means because I didn't get his base is not done. I never really
Mm.
paint the bases on Twitch because very frequently it's like, okay, I paint this color on there, cool, great, and I can be talking while I'm doing that, and then very frequently there's a wash step, and that wash step you put a lot of wash on there. It can take 45 minutes to an hour to dry, so then you're kind of just sitting there with nothing to do.
Yeah.
So and especially since it's one model, I can't even really like he's one big model, so I can't really assembly line him or anything. But so
Yeah,
I'm going to
that'd be
finish
kind of
him up.
boring to watch. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm going to finish him, and then probably take some pictures and stuff like that. And I also
Finish
have to
him.
exactly, and I also have to finish the terror geist that I did before him in the beginning part of Monster March, which
Oh,
is
yeah,
the
yeah.
big bat dragon zombie skeleton monster
hmm
thing. His base needs to be finished as well. So So yeah, I finished the Mulith Vortex on Twitch, and then I got an early copy of Warhammer Quest: Cursed City, which is the next big boxed game from Games Workshop,
Mm.
and it's part of the Warhammer Quest line. They had a Warhammer Quest game, and then there was Warhammer Quest Silver Tower, and then they had Warhammer Quest Blackstone Fortress, which was actually sci-fi in the 40K universe. And that was the most recent big kind of, and then they make expansions and do stuff with it and all that kind of jazz. And they're kind of a gateway game between board game and miniatures game. And now this
Mm-hmm.
new one, Cursed City, is going back into fantasy, like Age of Sigmar type realm. And there's a lot of cool vampires and skeletons, undead, and all that kind of stuff. So,
And I assume that like the Quest games are pretty siloed, or
what do you mean by that?
like the Blackstone Fortress, like nothing from that could be used in Cursed City and vice versa,
Oh,
right?
yeah, no. No. Now, the thing that's interesting though is that all those games also, like Blackstone Fortress, came with a pamphlet in it of this is stats for all the models in this box set to use them
Okay.
in Warhammer 40,000.
Ah, okay.
And the
That's
same
cool.
with this new Cursed City. It came with a basically again a pamphlet that's like, here's all the Age of Sigmar stats for all the models in this game, or almost all the
So,
models in this game.
so really, a really truly a gateway game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that and Games Workshop's been doing that for a while now. Where like nearly everything they put out, especially if it's anything aimed even vaguely at beginners, they're trying to figure out ways to then also make it
Lead you
easy
into
for
it.
you to get into the other stuff. So, but
Yeah.
I love skeletons. So and there's really really great skeleton sculpts in there. So I put those together over the weekend. Because I had to make a video about it. The video went live on Saturday morning, so I made the video on Friday, but I didn't get the game until like Wednesday night. So I just showed like what's in the box and talked about first impressions and stuff like that in that video. And then as soon as the video was done, then I could start, cutting apart all the parts and putting the skeletons together. And then I primed them on Sunday afternoon, and then on Monday night I started painting them last night on Twitch. So there's 10 of them, and I'm working on them. And so that'll be fun. I'll be working on them until they're done. And then, otherwise I've just been crazy busy, like with the secret project, and also
Mm.
still trying to get a 3D resin printer, the one that I want, the one you've got, the Elegoo Saturn. There might be a light at the end of the tunnel
Oh yeah.
because it's still not available on Amazon,
Mm-hmm.
and they are supposed to be getting some more going to Amazon eventually. And when they do, very probably scalpers will pick them all up and then resell them as collectibles at a $300 plus point,
Right.
which sucks. But I reached out to Elegoo and said, "Hey, I have this YouTube channel, blah blah," and they've reached out to me before, and I've always been like, "Yeah, no, thank you." I mean, I just don't want them to send me free stuff. So I reached out
Mm-hmm.
to them and I'm like, "Hey, I want to get this printer." And they're like, "Cool, well, we'll send you one for free." And I'm like, "No, I want to buy one. I just don't want to have to fight scalpers on Amazon. So when they come in, can I just buy one direct from you?" And there's a language barrier there because people I'm talking to, I believe, are in China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
But they speak they speak English way better than I speak Chinese. So but nonetheless,
Absolutely.
yeah. But eventually, we did get on. They did understand that I wanted to buy one from them and not get one for free. And then they were like, "Okay, well, yeah, when we get them in, we'll do that." But so in theory, maybe this month I'll hopefully get that printer, and then I've got to figure out. I talked with my wife a little bit about maybe trying to figure out a way to vent this little side room, this little root cellar room
Mm.
in the basement, and that might help too. So I don't know. I'm going to figure that out. I think that trying to possibly knock a hole in a window or remove a window and replace it with something
Mm.
else is probably a better idea to do in the summer than in the winter. Lord knows.
Yeah.
So yeah, but
Yeah,
we'll
I would
figure
look
that
into
out.
like dryer vent stuff. A lot of stuff is done for like dryer vents to go
Yeah.
out through like basement windows and all that. That
Yeah,
stuff's
that's
almost
that's that's what I was thinking exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
So so that's pretty much been my hobby lately. That's what I've been
Nice.
doing. Yeah.
Sweet.
So we were talking a little bit about Games Workshop, and
Mm-hmm.
they're a big company within tabletop miniature wargaming, and
Right.
there's a bunch of different big companies within tabletop wargaming or tabletop gaming in general. I mean,
Right.
hmm
Yeah. And that's kind of what we were talking about ahead of time was, there's kind of like the big three ish companies that kind of encompass the tabletop gaming. Like you said, like books,
Yeah,
like
you've got like the big three that encompass four genres, which I think is also kind of
right.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've got Games Workshop, of course, from the UK that does miniature wargaming. They kind of own the space. I mean, there's definitely competitors. I'm not going to say that they're, but they are the big one in the room.
Absolutely. They
Um,
are, like, from what we understand from numbers, because they're a publicly traded company.
mm,
I think in 2019 or 2020, I
hmm
think it was in 2019, the revenue was somewhere up over, I'm guessing here. I believe that I remember reading it was up over 800 or 900, or well, maybe not quite that million, but it was a huge number. But during that
mm,
same year, 2019, according to ICV2.com, the entire tabletop gaming market was only 1.8 billion. So they're amongst this group of real big, player, and they're the
right.
biggest in miniatures. Now, let's just start with an initial caveat on this whole entire thing. When we're
Mm,
talking about these big companies and about how big they are and all that kind of stuff, they're not big companies in the general, like, global corporate terms. They're not,
right.
Apple, Amazon, Exxon, whatever, Xerox. I don't know. Like, they're,
Right.
like I just said, in 2019, the entire tabletop market had 1.8 or 1.9 billion dollars in revenue. During that same year, the video game market had 187 billion dollars in revenue in that same. So we're, what is that? Uh,
1%.
Roughly, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very different thing. So,
Right.
but what we're saying, when we're saying big companies, we mean within the realm of tabletop, not within the realm of just companies
Right.
in general. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
but
So
these are
and then
big
you
companies within our niche.
absolutely. Yeah, board gaming, there used to be, I would say, like three or four kind of big ones, but now
Hmm.
they've all, like Asmodee, has in the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years, has kind of been merging and buying and kind of consolidating a bunch of
Yeah.
companies. Like Fantasy Flight was,
Hmm.
a big one in the room, and then now they're owned by Asmodee.
Hmm.
I've kind of forgotten about all the ones
Didn't
that they
didn't
picked
they buy
up.
Mayfair when Mayfair kind of started to go to business?
I
There
think
was a lot of
so.
a lot of the games that you're buying these days. I mean, there are there are other players out there too, like, like, obviously, like Renegade and that kind of stuff. I know there's other ones as well, though I can't think of any names.
Well, even
Restoration Games
right.
are they owned by somebody bigger? Like, they're not owned by Asmodee, are
No,
they?
they're an independent, but I mean, yeah,
Hmm.
I mean, you've got Hasbro too, which
Sure,
isn't a
sure,
big
true.
company in the board gaming as much, outside of your casual and family games. But
Yeah, that's true. But speaking of Hasbro, they own Wizards of the Coast. And
right,
Wizards of the Coast basically kind of owns two of these genres. Wizards of the
hmm
Coast makes Dungeons and Dragons because they bought TSR back sometime in the early 2000s, I think. I think.
yeah, yep,
Yeah.
that sounds about right.
And or was it in the late 90s?
Uh,
I don't
it's
remember now.
probably
Come to think
around
of
there
it.
somewhere.
Yeah, it's the late 90s, early 2000s, but they bought TSR, who originally, made Dungeons and Dragons, and then Wizards of the Coast is obviously also the force behind,
Magic the Gathering,
Magic the Gathering, which is the biggest
right,
collectible card game. Although
right. I mean, Pokemon is
Pokemon's
pretty
been doing
big.
real well recently, like just
Yeah,
specifically recently, I've been talking to my friend who's a store owner, and he's been like, it's just been nuts. We can't keep the Pokemon stuff in stock right now, so that's been going crazy.
right. I mean, and they do an amazing job on their video games.
Sure, the
Movies,
licensing and stuff. Yeah.
yeah, TV shows, all that stuff.
Hmm.
I mean, they do that really well. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of the,
So
the point. Yeah.
these big companies, you've got Asmodee, you've got Wizards of the Coast, you've got Games Workshop. They kind of own the the tabletop gaming space. Now, this is, again, not to say that there aren't other companies out there, and there are some companies that might have 20 employees. There are companies out there that might have 40 employees that are still
hmm
not nearly as big as these folks. And then but there are also a lot of companies out there that are one, two, three, maybe four people, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, but the majority of the revenue goes to these big, well-known companies. And I made a video on my YouTube channel a while back about kind of taking like the popular, let's say, miniature game, which is generally, something from Games Workshop, and comparing it to like popular music. Like very frequently, and this is, I think, the case with most of these genres, very frequently when you start out in, let's say, listening to music, you have a tendency to listen to popular music because it's what's on the radio, that kind of stuff. And although that's kind of changing, people don't listen to the radio nearly as much as they used to, but it's what's on the radio. It's what's popular on YouTube. There's that kind of thing, all that kind of stuff. So
what's in movies, who's licensing music for movies. Yeah. All that.
Exactly. And then as you get more and more into music, if you really become a music lover, you very frequently start to find smaller indie musicians and lesser known people and kind of niche kind of musical styles and all that kind of stuff. And it's the same thing with, let's say, all of these different types of games. In miniature wargaming, you get into, if you really get into it, you really start to do things a lot and maybe kind of get interested. You start to look at games that are much smaller, made by smaller people, not physically smaller, but fewer people, made by like teams of one, that kind of thing. And it's obviously a little bit harder to find. You got to do a little bit more searching. It's not on the shelves at every store. It's probably generally not at the shelves at any stores. But, we're also in a situation now where between the internet and all that kind of stuff, you can find, it used to be way harder to find indie music and indie games and indie anything. And now it's actually surprisingly easy. It's just not thrown in your face due to the basically lack of marketing budgets. So, but yeah, so it's interesting. And it's like I said, very frequently the big popular games from the big, companies are the thing that you initially find, and then some people stay there, and there's nothing wrong with that. But some people do kind of start to move into some of the indie stuff. But it does take a bit more work and a bit more love for the genre in some fashion.
Absolutely, yeah, because the big ones have more marketing, they have a better recognition, they have generally a better market, general market appeal. So you're going to see them in your Barnes and Noble or Target or Walmart.
Absolutely.
That kind of thing. So yeah, they just have more general, market presence.
They have more resources is really what it is. They can hire the best designers. They can hire the best artists, the big marketing budgets and all that kind of stuff. Like you mentioned, like that really helps. I mean, I was seeing board games at Best Buy. You know what I mean? Like, and it wasn't, like crazy indie board games. It was like, and I'm also not talking about like Monopoly or Sorry. I'm talking about Settlers of Catan and Carcassonne, things like that, which within our industry are the bigger games. But again, they're not, Hasbro stuff you find in every like Kmart. It's a lot of different kind of angles that you look at when we're in our conversation. So when, if a person's a gamer, they probably know when I'm talking about the big games, I'm talking about stuff like Catan within board gaming. But if you're not a big board gamer, then you might be thinking, Monopoly or Life or something like that. So, yeah.
Right. The benefit is they do larger volume runs, so they have more to distribute around. I remember was Gaslands for Osprey.
Yep.
That was by far their biggest release for years. And one of
the guys told me in the booth that they couldn't keep it in stock, that they were printing another 2,000 or 3,000 copies every 6 weeks. Like when it first launched, it just all of a sudden started to roll, and then all of a sudden they couldn't keep it in stock. And now they've redone the book, and now it's called Gaslands Reloaded, and it's a hardcover. And so they really knew it was time to put some actual effort into this. You know what I mean?
Right. But then you take that and then you compare it to just like Dungeons and Dragons releases every 2 to 3 months a new campaign book for Dungeons and Dragons, and you go to your local store and they've got a stack of 30 or 40 in every store, and they're all gone, and and stuff. Just the sheer volume difference between those two is
absolutely
from their biggest hit to just what a normal release is for companies even is staggering.
Like you go into any normal game store, they're going to have the big stuff. They're going to have Magic. Whereas they may not have Force of Will, which is a smaller collectible card game.
Dust or Song of Fire and Ice, right? Ice and Fire and Ice.
Song of Fire and Ice is Cool Mini, which Cool Mini is a good sized company, but
but not everybody's going to carry that line.
Right. No,
So,
absolutely. Well, what I was going to say was that you'll probably find Magic, but you might not find Force of Will. You might find a bunch of like big Asmodee board games. I'm blanking on names here, but you may not find like the more indie type stuff.
mhm.
You'll find Wizards of the Coast and probably Pathfinder, but you may not find what was that one that you were playing? Started with an R. Not Rifts. Didn't it start with an R? You had Mechs, I
Mm,
think.
no, it didn't start with an R, but I don't remember the name, and oh
We're both
gosh,
blanking at it.
yeah, somebody's
that's
yelling at their
that's my
phone right
fault. Yeah.
now, or
Yeah.
going, it was this, and so yeah, there'll be a comment. I'm sure one of you guys will tell us which
Yeah,
one
but
I'm
there's a lot. I
blanking on.
mean, there's a lot of like indie games out there that you generally don't find in stores. Some stores do. Like Gaslands was not showing up into every um, normal friendly
Hmm.
local game store. But the ones I frankly think the ones that understood the way that the industry was going and stuff like that were like, well, we're going to have a couple of copies in there because it'll probably sell. I've seen shops that have got stacks of not stacks, but a bunch of it, and I'm gladly surprised. But at this point
Hmm.
now, if you're a game store and you don't have Gaslands in stock, you probably should think about getting it. That kind of stuff. But it started
Right,
out
but at the same
pretty
time,
indie.
they probably don't have Rangers of Shadow Deep in stock,
Right. Yep.
which
Although
is
now
another is
Modifius
probably
is
one of
the
their bigger
publisher, and
ones.
so maybe they will. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thing too. And so Rangers of Shadow Deep is an interesting story. So as a quick note, so Osprey is not one of the biggest game companies out there, but they're a good size. They're owned by a
Hmm.
bigger publisher, not Bloomberg, something with a B though. Um, anyway, and so Osprey used to be just a company that made like source books, really, that you could use
Hmm.
for gaming. Like, oh, here's what the Napoleonic soldiers looked like in this year, and so now you have a bunch of nice color plates and good artwork, so that if you were going to sit down and paint a bunch of historical stuff, you had good reference and there's information and all that jazz. And then I don't know, maybe what 5 years ago, 6 years ago, they decided to actually start getting into gaming and actually
Hmm.
like produce games. And one of their earliest big hits was Frostgrave, which very possibly our listeners here have heard of. Well, so
Fosgrave
getting
was the one
in.
I was thinking of.
Oh, okay, so yeah, so Frostgrave was a big one,
Yep.
and that's done really really well for him. Gaslands has also done well,
Yep.
and it's to the situation where like they're picking up a lot of different companies, and they're able to put some resources. They're not a huge company, but they're bigger than some, so they can put like good resources. I know that they did. What is it called? Reality's Edge, which is like a cyberpunk skirmish game, and that was written by a guy who had been doing his own publishing. And I know that they also did Last Days, who is Ash Barker. He's a YouTuber
Hmm.
from Guerrilla Miniature Games. He had written a game and they published it, so they do all the cool artwork and all that kind of stuff. But Joe McCullough, who did the Frostgrave rules, decided he wanted to do this game called Rangers of Shadow Deep, which is what you mentioned. And they weren't interested in publishing it for some reason, or potentially he just didn't want to go through them to get it published, or he had his own ideas, or whatever the deal was. But so he was able to self-publish it, which is
Hmm.
the definition of indie at this point. But he self-published it through One Bookshelf, through wargamevault.com is the name of the website. And so then you could download a PDF or print on demand book. I have both. And they sold really, really, really well. So well that eventually, again, a slightly bigger company, Modifius, came along and said, hey, we want to start publishing this. So now Rangers of Shadow Deep is something you may find on more and more gaming store shelves because it's being published through a bigger company like Modifius. And again,
Right.
not as big as the big three, but still. So it's an interesting way that some of these things can work now in this particular industry, in this particular time. You could, build up a name, get yourself self-published without too much work, and then actually draw the attention of some of the bigger companies. So that's interesting. And the benefits, like we said, of the big companies are the resources, the artists, the layout people, like all that stuff. It's really, really super
Right.
helpful, and the distribution networks.
Right. That's another thing I know we've talked about in the past. That the reason why there's distribution companies is because you might produce 1,000 versions of your game, but and then a store might want one or two. You're not. It doesn't make
Exactly.
sense for you to try to ship 1 to 2 to all these different stores. So you ship your 100 to the distribution companies, and distribution companies take the orders and ship the 1 to 2, along with 1 to 2 of all these other games and everything else,
Mm-hmm.
and send them to the stores. So
But the thing that's really interesting is that the big companies have all started doing their own distribution because they're
yeah,
so big, they have the resources to do that. Like
right.
Games
And they know
Workshop.
that they don't have to do their marketing. They don't have to like try to sell a company on like, well, have you heard about D&D?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So like Games Workshop has their own distribution, so you can basically get a contract with GW and order direct from them. You can generally still get it from distributors as well for smaller game stores that maybe don't have the ability to get a contract, but most
Hmm.
decent sized game stores, they will be able to buy direct from Games Workshop. You can buy direct from Wizards of the Coast, I believe. Like you order your Magic the Gathering
Right.
new expansions and all that stuff direct from them. Again, you can get it from the distributors for smaller game stores who can't get a distribution set up through them. And now even Asmodee is doing the same type of thing. Asmodee has their own direct.
Hmm.
So that's the thing that's interesting too, is that distributors have this this definite place within the overall ecostructure. But when the big companies get big enough, they have a tendency to decide to cut out the middleman in that situation and become their own middleman, which is understandable. But yeah, it makes sometimes things a little difficult for smaller companies, for smaller game stores, let's say, not all the time, but if they've got limits, you have to order X amount of stuff and everything like that. And if you're a real small store, that's why you end up having to go through your regular distribution to
Right.
try to get some of that stuff, but then you're going
Or
to pay a
or
bit
they might
more.
say like, oh, if you want to carry 40K, you also have to carry Age of Sigmar, or
Sure.
you
Yeah.
also have to have a paint rack of our paints.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say you have to have this other stuff of our lines for us to allow
Right.
you to carry it. So I
So
know
there's a
like
lot
one of
of,
our local store that wasn't big in the minis, but wanted to, there was a little bit of a need for
mhm.
they were, with I think because of a lot of board game minis to do some more hobby stuff in the store, and they wanted to like just get a little bit into it, and were basically told like they either had to like turn almost half their store based on foot, how much
traffic or square
foot
footage.
they
Yeah.
had, square footage they had. They would have to have gone completely over to this other company, which was not their core. So they,
Mhm.
so it's weird, because on one hand you're like, well, they lost out on possible business, but on the other hand, it's their rules. So, and they're doing pretty good. So I can't say that they're doing it wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's a situation of the benefits of these big companies in comparison to their faults, and sometimes it's a matter of perspective. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like to certain stores, the fact that they can't order direct from company X, who does their own distribution, because they can't order enough stuff from them and justify it, or have the right stuff in stock, or whatever the deal might be, is
Hmm.
a real bummer, because they want to get the stuff at the good price, but now they have to go through a regular distributor who then tax on their price, and then they're a little bummed by that.
Right.
And so it's a whole different thing. Whereas a bigger store that has the budget, that has the customers for a
Volume.
specific type
Yep.
of line and the volume, they're like, well, this is great. I can order, instead of having to order through my distributor. Now, admittedly, as a store owner, you are now having to make more orders because you are
Hmm.
making one to your normal distributor, one to this big board game distributor who does their own distribution, one to Wizards of the Coast, so you can get some D&D and you can get some Magic the Gathering and stuff like that, and then one to GW or whatever. And so it's interesting, and again, some stores are great with it because they love the specific discounts, but you're also seeing a lot of these companies as well. I mean, definitely Wizards of the Coast and Games Workshop, they're also looking at the aspect of like, well, and you see it more and more. They don't have a problem with taking the game stores out of the equation too. They are absolutely happy to sell direct. Wizards of the Coast has been doing it a
Yeah.
lot more lately, and it's been making a lot of store owners unhappy.
Right.
So
They've been kind of setting the prices. They've been sometimes even like underselling their online prices from what they're allowing the stores to sell at
mhm.
their stores, which, it's their right to do. But at the same
Yeah.
time, we've always said, I think our belief is that the friendly local game store is really where people that are interested in the hobby go to learn to find out more stuff.
Mhm.
I can't go and find out more about Magic the Gathering without going to a local game store, really. I mean, conventions, maybe.
Sure.
Definitely not in the past year.
And you
Um,
can learn some things online, but a lot of people learn best in person generally.
Right, and those are
you
the
know?
people that are telling me like, "Oh, hey, we just got this new release in of this that you might want to check out," and stuff like that.
Hmm.
They're the ones that are giving me the recommendations. I just saw someone post on I think it was Twitter this last week, or maybe it was Reddit, and they were talking about how that's one thing that they kind of miss about all these video stores going out of business is they're missing movies that they hadn't heard about that have missed their radar in the last 5 years because they went from having their blockbusters or even their mom and pop shops that
Hmm.
knew them and knew their taste and what they're renting and were able to say, hey, you might like this stuff, to now they're doing everything digital, their Netflix, Prime, Hulu, all that are just using algorithms and generally just trying to force their what they want people to like.
And the algorithms are sometimes smart, but sometimes they're not. There's times when you're like,
Right.
I could have swore that this movie was on Netflix and I want to watch it, and you scroll and you scroll and you scroll and you scroll and you're like, it's just recently released, it should be in this like now trending or
Hmm.
recently released area, and you just won't see it, and then you'll do a search for it and then you'll find it, and that's because the algorithm is thinking, oh, this person doesn't want to see that, they want to see this and this, and so it just doesn't
Hmm.
show it to you even though you actually do want to see it, but the algorithm doesn't know everything yet. So you know what I mean?
Right.
So that's kind of a thing, whereas if you walk around in the store, you walk through, it's very frequently, especially the new releases are usually alphabetical, so you're just walking through and then eventually you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And
Hmm.
that's a little bit harder to do. Yeah, we lost a local we lost a was a Family Video. I think the Family Video here in town, I think, closed
Right.
over the pandemic, so
And
that's kind of a bummer.
it's not that those companies are bad either. I mean,
No.
if you think of Blockbuster and Family Video, they took out smaller companies too because of the
Yep.
whole. They were doing the price sharing of rentals versus buying the $100 video of each copy, which is why they are able to have 40 copies of Terminator 2 on their
Hmm.
shelves versus one or two like your stores normally did.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think there's the last Blockbuster, I think, is
Oh,
a
that
movie on Netflix right
documentary.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they kind of talk about that part of it as well. They kind of so they talk about the fall of Blockbuster, but they also talk about the rise of like why did it become popular, and then that was one of the things is like they could pretty much guarantee that a new release was going to be there, whereas before that it was like if you weren't the first one there, maybe you could see the new release in the first couple of months if you were lucky.
Yeah.
Normally, you like I remember we would call and like got put on a wait list and like, okay, we'll let you know when so and so brings it back. There's like
Hmm.
three other
Hmm.
people ahead of you, and so as long then you were kind of hoping people brought it back pretty fast, and then maybe it's like 2 or 3 weeks from now you could see the hot new movie.
Yeah.
Versus where it was like, oh yeah, 50 people rented from our store the new movie and all saw it the first night.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, the big companies, they have their benefits, but they also have their faults. Absolutely.
Hmm.
Like, and we kind of talked about this before when we were talking about like popular music versus more indie music. The appealing to a broad market is fine, but it doesn't necessarily have something for everyone. They do try to go, and this doesn't. I don't want to make this sound like a bad thing, the term, but they do try to go for the lowest common denominator. They do try to,
Hmm.
like, if a game is something that's maybe got a very niche interest, we're less likely to publish it because we need to make money than it's something that would be broadly more loved, let's say, by a bigger audience.
Right.
Chances of taking risks and things like that is not high with big companies, and it's because the big companies. Well, I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's because the big companies are companies. They gotta, they
Right.
can, and kind of like you were just talking about too. They'll push out some competition sometimes, and they're also sometimes seen to be price gouging, and there's MSRP issues and things like that.
Hmm.
It's interesting to hear people throw around terms like monopoly. I get people in comments on my videos, who are angry at Games Workshop, and they'll say, "Well, they're a monopoly," and I respond almost every time, and I'm like, "No, they're not a monopoly at all. There are plenty of companies out there that make miniatures. They're
Right.
the only company that makes their miniatures. That's true." But
Hmm.
that's like saying that Coke is a monopoly because Pepsi can't make Coke. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a fine line between what's a monopoly and just being a market leader.
Right.
And
Exactly.
market leaders can set
Exactly.
trends. I mean, if you look at the iPhone for the last 15,
decade.
20 years, or however, is it 15 years maybe?
When did it come out? 2008 was the first one?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, you look at it. I mean, there's some stuff that's like, oh well, Samsung had this, or Microsoft's, the Windows Phone had this, 10 years ago when an iPhone will do a new, it's like, yeah, but until the market leader does it, a lot of people don't know about it.
Right, exactly.
Even though a lot of people have Android phones, but they're all kind of made out of a bunch of different companies underneath them, so it's less of a shared market. So
right. I mean, there's plenty of companies out there that are big companies that everyone sees and goes, okay, well, maybe this game isn't for me because I don't like this particular aspect of it. But they don't see the smaller companies who are doing a game that they would like because they do that aspect of it differently. Like, to get real into the weeds here, we're in 9th edition of Warhammer 40,000, and I am still, frankly, a bit annoyed by the activation scheme. The way that basically you and I roll off at the beginning of the game, whoever rolls highest gets to go first, and then every turn I get to go first for the rest of the game.
Right, which
there
just
are
seems
plenty of ways that other companies are doing it now. From rolling off every turn. Even Games Workshop is having other, like in Age of Sigmar, you roll off every turn to see who goes first for each turn. In games like a bolt action from Warlord or Conflict 47 from Warlord, you have a die for every one of your units, and you put them in a bag, like a dice bag, and then your opponent has a die for every one of their units, and then you just reach in and start pulling out dice to see who gets to go, okay, well, that was one of my dice, so I get to activate a guy. I reach back in, oh, hey, this is another one of my dice, and then it's maybe one of your dice. So there are lots and lots of options out there, and if you just don't like... But the issue is, if you look at 40K because it's the huge dominant and you go, well, I don't like that style of game or whatever, you may not realize that there are other types of games out there because they don't get the marketing budget, they don't get the exposure.
And if you look at, from a Games Workshop, for them to change something, it's a big risk to them. If they, look at D&D, is it 4th edition? Right, that basically like almost killed off D&D for a little while.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I mean, that spun off Pathfinder, and it just did abysmal because they made some changes that they thought were good, that they thought that everybody was asking for, and it just did not go over.
4th edition became almost like a video game to some degree. They tried to pick up a bunch of video game tropes, like almost like World of Warcraft type tropes, and a lot of people hated it. And so then they were like, ooh, we got to fix that. And then they came up with 5th, which a lot of people seem to really, really like.
Right. But I mean, that's the risk that they have, is that they could alienate their market. And putting out other versions of your product can also, it doesn't always bring in new people. It can just, break up your current. Like, I remember back when I worked at the radio stations, they were always talked about, Coke. If Coke, releases Diet Coke, well, that doesn't always bring a bunch of people that weren't Coke drinkers. What that does is it gives Coke drinkers more options that might not buy something else. But it did take away some actual Coke drinkers that were like, oh, I like the taste, but now I have a Diet Coke version. Same thing happened when they did, Coke Zero. It didn't necessarily bring them a lot of new people drinking Coke for the first time. It kind of broke up and gave more options and less chance that people would leave their brand. But now they had to market 3 different brands, versus the one brand. So there's a lot behind business, business strategies and everything else of, don't break, if it's working and most people like it, keep it, even if it's maybe, there are people that are against it that want, like you said, like the activation. Well, if they changed it, there's nothing saying that everybody won't go, but this is how your activations always work. That's why I keep coming back to this game. I want that activation. They could lose a whole bunch of people. They don't, it's a lot of guesswork on their part.
And one of the big issues with being a company of that size, and it's with all these big 3, you have to make money, because you are not just doing this because you love games. You're doing this because you're owned by stockholders, and they have to get benefits. They have to get money from basically being stock people. So if you do something in your business that hurts your business, it's bad. Like, it is like literally, like, they talk about due diligence and stuff like that. Like, you can get in trouble or fired for not doing proper due diligence and certain things like that. And
well,
so
even
if you get to be this big of a company,
your company could still be making money, but you suddenly lost, your markets, say your profits went down to, you basically broke even, but you had record years up until you did this thing.
Mm-hmm.
You could lose your job. A bunch
Yeah,
of people could lose
absolutely.
their jobs.
Yeah, because
by
you're
doing
still
that.
making money, but not enough money. That's the big
Right.
issue with big giant corporations like this, is that they need to keep making more money, and then people will. It's perceived by gamers that, well, they're losing sight, and they're not making this for the love of the game, and they're not wrong in any way. Like, this is at this point, it is not a game company; it is a business. And there's a definite difference there. When you got a couple of people who sit down and decide to write a game in their free time, and they work on something and they publish it, and maybe it gets bigger, and then they be able to start doing this full time, and then maybe they're up to like 2 or 3 people or whatever, or 4 people maybe, and they're building and stuff like that. A big portion of that, like, we've said it how many times, what's the easiest way to get a small fortune in tabletop gaming?
You start with a large fortune.
Start with a large fortune, right? Exactly. There's not a lot of money in there, but these biggest corporations who get to the top of these different genres got there by being businesses first and gamers second. So, in some situations, some gamers can look at that and say that's a problem, but it will definitely define the way these businesses have to make their decisions. We have to keep raising the prices a bit every time, because we need to be able to make more money than we did last year, and they need to, all that kind of stuff. And also, like, the legal stuff, they have to basically leverage their IP. Like, it has to be defended. You can't just be like, okay, well, someone's making a thing that can be played along with our game. We make Settlers of Catan, someone made an expansion for it. You have to have Settlers of Catan to play with this expansion that they sell, but it's cool. Maybe it'll sell more copies. No, if you're a really big company, you can't allow that. If you're using your trademarks, anything like that,
absolutely,
you have to defend it, because if you don't, you can lose it.
I saw a big thing. I remember in the 90s when they started doing like t-shirt printing in the malls and like embroidery. People were upset because like Walt Disney would go and they would sue these like little mom and pop shops out of oblivion for like putting Mickey Mouse on the shirt and stuff. And everyone's like, why do they have to pick on, they have enough money, they have to pick. Well, basically that comes down to, I don't know if this is how it works in every country, but I know for copyright and trademark law in the US that basically if any company can show that you knew about something and didn't defend it for your intellectual property, it basically allows anyone then to do it. So if they are able to go, well, you knew this one company was making bumper stickers with Mickey Mouse on it, and you didn't go after them, so
you can't sue this other company. Yeah,
you can't sue this other company for taking Mickey Mouse and making their own cartoons with it. So it's an all or nothing type deal, which
with it. I mean, within Games Workshop, you can see this through the naming conventions. They used to have their paints used to just have normal colors, but now for names, and now all the paints have crazy names that are all copyrightable. So that, like, if you make a color that is whatever it was, then some other company can't decide to make a color that matches it, and put the name. It's like this,
right?
The
they can't mark
it
as yeah, right, yep.
Right. Because now you have changed the name from Flaming Purple to Magos Purple, and that you can copyright, whereas, Flaming Purple you can't necessarily, or whatever, and so, there's lots of different things like that you have to keep in track when you are a big company. When you're a small company, you can do it for the love of the game, absolutely, and you can make, wildly differing decisions, and you can decide to take chances and take risks. But when you're a big honking company, you have to do things by, corporate bylaws.
Right.
You have a lot of people who are looking over your shoulder.
And the larger the volume too, the larger decisions are, the different decisions can, affect you. If you own your own personal pizza shop, and you're like, oh, every table or every order that comes in, I'm going to give them a stack of napkins. Okay. You're going to give them 10 napkins.
Right.
Because that costs you 10 cents.
Sure.
And people are fine with that. Now you go to, say, McDonald's, if you give everyone 10 napkins versus everybody 1 or 2 napkins, you're talking millions of dollars of difference.
Exactly. Because of the volume. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
The volume. So, same thing, Games Workshop, I know that, there's stuff that, you're like, oh, well, this like little mini game gave me all this extra stuff. that's really cool. It probably they looked at it and were like, oh, this is like 25 cents to us. But you take that and multiply it by tens of thousands of copies, then it gets really expensive to do stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we have to look at too, and this is not exactly a fault. It sometimes comes across as a fault, but the inherent like just striving to make more and more money. People refer to some of these big companies as greedy all the time. All of those, this greedy corporation. And again, we've explained some of it by talking about the shareholders. Shareholders have expectations,
Right.
and when you're a big enough company, and you have shareholders, you have to do what they kind of want. But you also, if you have 300, 400, 6,000 employees. I mean, if we start talking about Games Workshop as a big company, let's say, they have retail locations all over the world. And so they have a lot more employees than most any other game company out there. More than, I would say, but I bet they have probably more employees if you count the retail folks. They have probably more employees than even Wizards of the Coast probably does.
Yeah, I could see that.
But the thing is that that's just a lot of people who depend on you to eat. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like when you're like especially like a small hobby press that's starting to get some traction and people are really starting to enjoy your stuff, you can make these weird changes and then maybe you didn't do as well this month or whatever the deal was. But when you do something that really hurts the long-term, version of your company, the way that people think of it, it can affect, you have to lay people off. People have to get different jobs. Like there's you have a lot of responsibilities as well. So having to make a decent amount of money is also super important. Now, the question is whether that they also treat their employees well. That's a big deal as well. And, I don't know. Some of the game companies I don't know a ton about. I know I've heard some kind of negative things about Wizards of the Coast, a little bit here and there about the employee kind of thing. The what do you call it? The environment. I've heard also like good things about Games Workshop. I've heard that they back in 2018, maybe after 8th edition had been out for a while, they basically split £5 million with all of their employees. So it was a big profit sharing kind of a thing. Oh yeah. So, that's cool. And I'm glad to see some of these companies doing that, but some of the companies, I don't know as much. I think it's way worse in the video game industry, frankly, because there's crunch
absolutely.
and there's all that stuff. But again, that's also a size issue. A company like Electronic Arts, EA, is massive in comparison to Games Workshop, Wizards of the Coast, and Asmodee put together. You know what I mean? It's still huge. So I guess the question really then comes down to, are these big corporations in gaming, are these big companies inherently bad or not? I don't personally think so, but they do frequently get a bad rap.
Right.
And in some situations, like I said, sometimes they deserve it for little things here and there. There's certain things I think, again, like I said, some of the stuff I've heard about Wizards of the Coast and the working environment, there've been articles and things like that. That's a real problem. When some of these companies start to try to kind of carve out and get business away from the friendly local game stores, I think that's also that's bad and it's short-sighted for the industry. But they're trying to make money and they're producing a lot more stuff and they're trying, that's some of that stuff is just inherently the way it is. And some of it is just because of the size they have to be. They have to keep churning. They have to keep moving, Right. I get people ask me all the time, why do these companies keep making new versions of these games, specifically in miniatures? Like, why is there a new version of Warhammer 40,000 every 3 years? Well, because they're if they sold it and didn't sell another version of it again, their sales would slowly dissipate. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like if they just made 40K and they were like, okay, well, that's the last version. Cool. You'd get new people joining from time to time and obviously things like that. So the long tail, but
yeah. Well, you might even get less people though.
Yeah, that's true too.
Joining, because you might go, oh, geez, well, I wasn't in there at the beginning. Magic sometimes feels that way where you're like,
oh, yeah.
Well, I haven't been collecting for 20 years or I got rid of my cards a long time ago. I can't get back into it because I don't have that, so they'll introduce different, ways to play that, allows Commander. You to kind of jump in. Yep. Or, or they'll have, we're only going to play with these decks. So, or these, sets. So,
well, I mean, that's really, frankly, that's what the competitive play is for Magic, and I don't know a ton about it, but I know that if you're playing competitively in tournaments and stuff like that, you can't play with cards from 20 years ago. You can only play with the last 3 or 4 sets or something like that, and then they rotate out, and then that last set, when the new set comes out, the set that was the oldest drops off, and then it just constantly goes that way. So there's that too. The other thing to understand, I think, is that basically almost every single huge company started as a small company at some point. And I think that that's important to understand, because some people look at these things as like these companies as these huge, specifically within gaming. I mean, you know, it's even true in outside of gaming, but within gaming, people will look at what we perceive to be these huge companies that aren't really all that big in the grand scheme of things. But we'll
Right.
talk about them as these kind of entities and stuff like that. But every one of them started as, like, I remember walking past Wizards of the Coast's janky little booth at Gen Con in the mid 90s, early 90s. They had like a single, or maybe they had two booths squished together. They had this terrible logo back then. I mean,
Right.
it was really not good. And I remember walking by and looking at it and going, Wizards of the Coast. Well, that's a dumb name. And then seriously, like 6 or 7 years later, they owned Gen Con and TSR. I mean, it was very quick, actually, but they all start somewhere, you know?
Right. Yeah. You look at all, even Apple started, a little booth in a tech fair. TSR, when, Gary Gygax, he was at Origins back in the day, and had a little booth.
Yeah,
they all took chances at one point in time. They all had to make their product go, and now, like we said, for one reason or another, they might be less likely to change directions. But at the same time, they're bringing in people that may not have been in there. I mean, the hobby's growing. I mean, look at what Pokemon Go did to the hobby, as bringing in more people in the collectible card games. I thought Pokemon was kind of gone, and then all of a sudden now, my kid plays Pokemon. He buys all the new games. He collects cards again. He started collecting those cards and playing those cards. So it brought him back into it by them marketing and leveraging their IP out there and taking chances and stuff there. But
I mean, the big gaming companies can be seen as a bit out of touch sometimes. Like, you'll look at that, like if you're part of the industry and you've been doing it for a while, you look at it and go, oh, like we talked about, like they sometimes are a little rigid in their ways and don't change their rules as much and things like that. Where it's difficult and it's understandable. But the thing is that if you as the consumer want the big budget experience, you want the RPG supplements that have amazing, gorgeous artwork, amazing covers, tons of amazing, beautiful writing, all this kind of stuff.
Right.
You want the board games that are just completely just choked with miniatures that are gorgeous, and there's like really super thick card and all that kind of stuff. That's really almost impossible for a small indie kind of game company to do. It's only the big dudes really who can do that.
Right.
And so it's a if you're going to be playing indie games, you're going to be very frequently looking at PDFs. You're going to be very frequently messing with kind of, frankly, some sort of janky production, but you have to look at it from, is the game itself good? But if you're really, really, really interested in components and how those work, then you're going to be kind of, that's you're going to be sticking with the big guys, as it were. Because they have like we said at the beginning, the resources to be able to do it.
Look at blockbuster movies. If you take that industry.
Oh, sure, like the Marvel movies and stuff like that,
or like what's his name that always just blows up stuff? Michael Bay. And you talk, like, you listen to some actors and they're like, yeah, I do some of those big budget movies so that I can go and basically take a cut, or take a low budget movie so I can make more artsy or more films that are, but they're like, but I got to get paid. My family has to eat and live, and my assistants and everything else. So there it's kind of like that. If there was only indies, it'd be hard to have Gen Con conventions and stuff like that, because it'd be hard to get 2,000 indie games without any big promoters, any big sponsors.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's a situation too of like, I frequently look at a lot of the models coming out of Games Workshop as like, wow, that's really cool. I'm really looking forward to using that model in some indie game. You know what I mean? Although the thing that's interesting, and this is a thing that, maybe we'll talk about it in another episode, but the thing that's interesting is that a lot of these big companies have to understand that we are, and this is a little bit more in the miniatures realm, but we're on a bit of a precipice, and we have it that same thing in RPGs as well. Not so much collectible card games, I think, but the idea that I can very soon produce potentially very, very nice looking miniatures. Well, not the miniatures so much, but the STL files that then I will sell to you, and then you will print them at your house. and I can also send you the PDF. Like there's a lot of shipping issues in this world right now because of COVID and things like that. And you're seeing these companies that are able to kind of take this a more digital approach within the tabletop gaming realm doing well, or at least doing better. And I think that it's either going to become to a situation where the big companies are going to adapt and start doing a little bit more of that kind of stuff themselves. You're already seeing with companies like Modiphius and like Osprey, they sell everything digitally or print if you want to go that route.
Right.
Even Games Workshop does a bit of that.
I can see, I could see in 5 years, Games Workshop possibly even doing like a monthly subscription. You have a Warhammer subscription where you get exclusive models and stuff like that are just STLs. I mean,
maybe I don't know. Like anybody but Games Workshop, frankly, honestly. But I mean, as it is right now, there's already companies using Patreon, like smaller groups of people who are sculptors using Patreon, and then basically giving you 10 to 20 STLs a month, and you give them $10 a month, and then you print what you want. I mean, that's getting huge.
Then you got tournaments and stuff too, right? Like where you have to use their specific models. So.
Right. Again, if you're playing competitively, then you're in their ecosystem and stuff. But yeah, so there's a lot of different options, but things are changing.
You had Netflix streaming and Hulu streaming, right? And now all of a sudden you're seeing like Discovery Plus and Disney Plus and Paramount Shudder, Plus.
Like if you just want horror movies and stuff like that, and not like big horror movies, but more indie stuff. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of the technology is moving in a situation where things are getting decentralized so much more that I think that the big companies are losing some of their grasp on the stranglehold. But
then you'll see some of those big companies, they're able to shift over to there and then just suddenly take over, huge market shares just by their name. So
if they're willing to do it and take the risk, and that's also the important
some
thing.
Will, some won't.
Yeah. People ask me all the time, they're like, well, when do you think the Games Workshop is going to start doing STL files? Or, are they going to produce their own 3D printer that only prints their files? And I don't know that they'll ever do it, but there's plenty of people who are starting to head in that direction. So, it's an interesting time to be alive. Let's just say that. But so, yeah, the whole concept of big companies versus small companies, or the big companies inherently bad, in gaming, I would say generally no, they have their faults, but they're not, I don't think they're evil. You may have other ideas. You can
James
put them in the
Bond
comments,
isn't having to break into them and take them over. And
I don't think any of those companies are inside of a hollowed out volcano, but that would be sort of cool. Games Workshop isn't like Nottingham. I don't think they have any hollowed out volcanoes.
No, that's like Robin Hood territory, right?
Might have a castle. That'd be kind of cool. Ooh. Yeah. I've seen pictures of the building, but I've never been there. It doesn't look like a castle. So, and what's Wizards of the Coast is in Seattle. I don't know if there's any. Well, there's Mount Rainier, but I don't think that's hollow.
No. St. Helens. No, that's in Oregon.
Or is that? Yeah, no. St. Helens is. Yeah, right. Anyway. But so if you got some comments and stuff like that, let us know. Shoot us an email. I'll tell you the email address in just a second. Put it in some comments below. And take a look at your. Obviously, you're probably cognizant of the big games, the big companies out there already, but they're not all bad. And also you can take a look at the small companies too. We talked about indie gaming back in episode 31. If you're interested, you go back and check out that one on our audio feed or through the YouTube channel. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments, like I mentioned, and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you were listening via your favorite podcast player or just aren't into the whole YouTube comment section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@iamgamefor.com. You can also keep up to date with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And check out our website at www.iamgamefor.com. That is www.iamgamefor.com. Thanks.